Hey guys, welcome to KNITS YouTube channel. My name is Steven, and in this video I'll share with you some tips and tricks to how to sew with knitted fabric. So I feel like people either love or hate sewing with knits. Personally, I used to find it very difficult to sew with knits, but that was because I didn't really know how to approach the knitted fabric. Before we dive into the different techniques of sewing with knits, I'd like to just briefly go over the difference between woven fabric and knitted fabric. Here we have an example of a plain weave fabric. Woven fabric is made on a loom where you have threads coming from two different directions, the warp and weft. The warp thread is running along the length of the fabric, while the weft is woven over and under the warp across the width of the fabric. This creates a fabric that is firm in both directions, but it has natural elasticity on the bias of the fabric. Knitted fabric is different. With knits, we typically only have one thread that is intertwined around itself in loops from the next row. Creating fabric this way gives natural stretch along the width of the fabric and also a little amount of stretch along the length of the fabric. Here I have examples of different types of knits. The first one is a typical example of knitted cotton used for t-shirts around the world. It has stretch but not so much drape. The second fabric is a knitted viscose. As you can see, the fabric has been knitted on larger needles, which makes the stitches more visible. The fabric has nice stretch and drape. The third example is a rib knit in a mix of mostly natural fibers. This rib knitted fabric typically has a lot of elasticity and nice drape also. I'm now going to show you different ways of sewing with these three kinds of fabric so we can compare the finishes next to each other. When it comes to sewing with knits, it's really nice to have an overlocker like this one. This machine is able to create a seam that stretches with the fabric. Try a few different settings on some scrap fabric to find a setting you're happy with. In this respect, it's good to know about the dial on the side of the overlocker called the differential feed, which you can turn up or down. Without going into too much detail about how it works, try turning it up and down and see what happens to the stretchiness of the seam. If you don't have an overlocker, you can use a normal zigzag stitch instead. This stitch will also allow the fabric to stretch, but it will not have the same clean finish when you look at the seam. The problem with using only an overlock seam to finish a project is that sometimes you might be working on a garment where it is required that you can press the seam open. For example, I have this knitted blouse here, and I'll show you why you need to press the seam open for this one. This blouse is a wrap blouse, which means the waist tie needs a hole on one side seam to pass through. To get a neat looking hole, I had to overlock the side seams on the front and back bodice individually before I could stitch the seams together with a straight stitch, and then press the seam open and enforce the hole. This leads me to the next type of stitching, the straight stitch. Many people will tell you that you cannot sew knits with a straight stitch, but I disagree. I think it depends on the project you're working on and the type of knit you are using. If you want to sew with a straight stitch, it's important to increase the stitch length to about 3.5, and then you can also experiment with stretching the fabric lightly when you feed it through the machine. If your fabric is very stretchy and you're making a high performance garment, like that could be swimwear, it could be underwear, it could be gym wear, then I don't recommend sewing with a straight stitch. Then it's better to sew with a regular zigzag stitch, or you can try one of the other stitches that many sewing machines have. Like this elastic straight stitch, or this tiny zigzag stitch that looks like a lightning stroke. These types of stitches look like straight stitches, but they have more elasticity. The only drawback is that if you make a mistake, it takes forever to unpick these kind of stitches, which is why I rarely use them. So here you can see the different kinds of stitches and different kinds of knit fabrics I have on my table today. My own personal favorite way of sewing with knits for everyday knitted garments for myself is to use a regular straight stitch where I stretch the fabric lightly when I feed it through the sewing machine, and then I finish by overlocking the edges afterwards for a clean finish. As you can see, this method still allows the fabric to stretch a little. Of course, if you overstretch it, the thread will snap, but it has yet to happen on any of my knitted garments. Alright, so guys, the main point I want you to take from this video is that I encourage you to try different stitches and different techniques to find the one that's working for you, your fabric, and the project you're working on. I hope this video was helpful. If you have any questions or comments, you're more than welcome to drop them below. Also, I would encourage you to subscribe to my YouTube channel so you never miss out on videos like this. Bye now!